Imagine the very first astronaut. You might picture a human in a white suit, or maybe a dog in a little metal capsule. But the first animals that we intentionally launched into space weren't heroic pilots or brave pups. They were fruit flies. Tiny, buzzing, banana-loving fruit flies. Today, on this episode of Insects for Fun, we're going to talk about insects in space. How bugs became the first astronauts, what happens to a spider web when there's no up or down, and why the future moon base might sound a little bit buzzy. Let's rewind to the 1940s. Scientists wanted to know what space would do to a living body, and they needed a small, fast-reproducing test pilot. Enter Drosophila melanogaster, the common fruit fly. In 1947, fruit flies became the first animals intentionally sent into space and brought back alive. They rode in a captured German V-2 rocket, briefly experiencing the harsh environment beyond our atmosphere. Why fruit flies? Well, besides being tiny and easy to keep, they share a surprising amount of genetic overlap with humans, and their rapid life cycle means researchers can study multiple generations in a single mission. From the beginning, insects weren't just passengers, they were pioneers. Insects have actually flown on dozens of missions since the 1940s. Fruit flies, beetles, crickets, even honeybees. They're small, durable, and biologically revealing, which is great for helping scientists to answer questions like, how does microgravity affect development? What happens to the immune system in orbit? And how does radiation damage DNA over generations? And the answers we've gotten have shaped our understanding of how humans might survive long-term in space. One of the most charming space stories comes from 1973 aboard Skylab. But first, what was Skylab? Skylab was the first United States space station launched by NASA in 1973. It was basically America's early practice home in space, a big lab where astronauts lived for weeks at a time, running experiments, growing plants, and famously hosting two orb weaver spiders, Anita and Arabella, species Araneus diadematus. These spiders were sent into space to test whether spiders could build webs in microgravity. At first, as you'd expect, the webs were chaotic, irregular, drifting, and uneven. Without gravity, there was no natural sense of down. But after a few attempts, the spiders adapted. Their later webs became more symmetric, more Earth-like, and more intentional. Astronauts noted that the spiders began anchoring their webs differently, compensating for the drifting air currents inside Skylab. Without gravity to help them pull silk down, they used their own body movements to create tension, almost like tiny floating architects learning new construction rules in real time. Their behavior shifted too. They explored more before committing to web lines, and their movements became slower and more deliberate, as if they were relearning what their bodies could do. Fast forward to 2007, a cockroach named Nadezhda mated in space aboard the Photon M3 satellite, a Russian biological research spacecraft designed specifically to study how living organisms respond to the stresses of microgravity, cosmic radiation, and isolation. Photon M3 was essentially a flying lab packed with plants, microbes, worms, and insects. Scientists chose cockroaches because they're hardy, reproduce quickly, and offer a unique chance to study how gravity influences mating, fertilization, and early embryonic development. After returning to Earth, Nadezhda later gave birth to 33 babies conceived entirely in orbit, marking a strange and fascinating milestone in the history of reproductive biology. Scientists noticed subtle developmental differences in her offspring, including slightly accelerated darkening of their exoskeletons and irregularities in the timing of their molts. Small hints that microgravity can subtly alter how an insect's body forms, grows, and regulates key developmental hormones. These changes weren't dramatic enough to harm the cockroach nymphs, but they suggested that even the earliest stages of life, from fertilization to embryonic development, respond differently when gravity is taken out of the equation. But cockroaches may also have a practical future in space. They're incredible decomposers, and space agencies have proposed cockroach-based bioreactors to consume astronaut food scraps, paper, and plant waste. In return, roaches produce usable compost and even potential protein. In a moon base, the quiet rustling in a compost module might be the sound of a thriving ecosystem. Now let's talk about crickets and mealworms. Both of these are farmed on Earth for food and feed, but in space, they become partners in survival for reasons like creating soil, turning waste into food, and functioning as biological machines that require little water, food, and almost no space. Astronauts have watched these insects molt and grow in microgravity aboard several missions. Researchers housed crickets and mealworms in small ventilated enclosures fitted with cameras so they could observe every stage of their development in zero gravity. Even in weightlessness, their delicate exoskeletons hardened normally after each molt, confirming that gravity isn't required for successful shedding. Their behavior did shift though. In weightlessness, crickets launch themselves from the walls in slow drifting hops that look almost like underwater swimming. And mealworms curl, twist, and spiral through the air as if trying to remember which direction is down. These movements help scientists understand how insects sense orientation and adapt their muscles and instincts when gravity suddenly vanishes. Honeybees have also flown in space, and for a fascinating reason. Scientists wanted to know whether one of Earth's most important pollinators could navigate, fly, and communicate when the usual rules of gravity no longer apply. Bees rely heavily on gravity and sunlight to orient themselves and perform their famous waggle dance, the movement-based language that tells other bees where nectar-rich flowers are. In early experiments aboard the space shuttle in the 1980s, bees were released inside small flight chambers. At first, they tumbled and drifted in clumsy loops, unable to tell up from down. But within hours, they began experimenting, clinging to surfaces, adjusting wing beats, and eventually learning to fly short, controlled paths. Apparently, bees can adapt to microgravity flight, and they can still communicate direction by switching from gravity-based cues to light-based ones. It was the first hint that future space greenhouses might one day include real living pollinators. Who knows? One day in the future, we might just have a Mars greenhouse. The air warm and humid, rows of tomato plants glowing under LED suns, and among the vines, bumblebees or honeybees drifting in slow arcs. And with that, we're going to end this episode. Thanks again for listening, and of course, make sure to rate the show 5 stars and leave a review wherever you listen. And go out and tell some people, because nothing weighs more than the recommendation from a friend or family member. Lastly, you can check out the Patreon to further support the show and what I do.